What's going on, family? This is Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs Series. Let's continue with 100 years of World Championship fights. September 21st, 1925, World Welterweight Champion, Elizabeth, New Jersey's Toy Bulldog, Irish Micky Walker, would defeat Dave Shade in 15 rounds in New York's Yankee Stadium. It was in defense of his World Welterweight Championship crown, which he would keep. But keep in mind, Micky Walker would lose to Dave Shade December 21st, 1921, Broad Athletic Club in Newark. And who was Dave Shade? His name was Dave Charles. He was born March 3rd, 1902 in California. He died June 23rd, 1983 at the Concord, California. Now, he's to your right and Micky Walker is to your left. And what was most impressive to me about Dave Shade, fought from 1918 to 1935. He had 225 total bouts, 132 wins, 28 losses, and 17 by the knockout route. But he had 61 draws. That's amazing. He was in a ring with fighters such as Danny Kramer and Everhammer from Chicago. But Jack Britton, who he was in a ring with, lost his crown to Micky Walker. And Jack Britton had 20 fights with Ted Kid Lewis. He was dropped by Benny Leonard and could have been counted out had not Benny Leonard hit him while he was down. Pete Latzo took the welterweight championship crown away from Micky Walker. Dave Shade would be in the ring with him. Be in the ring with Allentown Joe Gans, who was a current middleweight champion. He would face Maxie Rosenblum on two separate occasions. Maxie Rosenblum was a light heavyweight champion. Would also be in the ring with Walcott Langford. Jack McVeigh. Jack McVeigh was a colored middleweight champion. And Al Gaynor, who was a Canadian light heavyweight champion. Very good fighter he was. So Dave Shade was the goods. And he was a very good opponent for Micky Walker's title defense of the welterweight crown, September 21st, 1925. Now, I mentioned to you that Dave Shade faced Walcott Langford. And before we move on to the next fight, I wanted to show you Walcott Langford. Walcott Langford. All right, let's move on. Now, the next World Championship fight that took place in 1925, September 25th of 25, the America's light heavyweight champion, Gene Tunney, knocked out Bartley Madden 3 rounds. It was scheduled for 15 at Minneapolis Hockey Arena. And what was impressive about this fight was that Gene Tunney hit him with a beautiful 3-piece combination. Hit him with a straight right hand that spun him around into his own corner. And when he got to his own corner, he didn't know exactly what to do. And he turned around and Gene Tunney just hit him again. And he was out cold. Now, who was Bartley Madden? He was born September 1st, 1890, Dublin, Ireland. He died March 5th, 1930. He was 39 years of age at the time of his death, and he would reside in New York. Now, he stood 5 foot 11 inches. He was a heavyweight and had a 70-inch reach. Fought from 1912 to 1929. Had 40 total bouts and 26 wins. 9 losses, 16 knockouts, and he was only stopped twice. Now, he was in a ring with fighters such as Harry Greb. We know him as a middleweight champion and America's light heavyweight champion. As a matter of fact, Gene Tunney's only loss was to Harry Greb. He was in a ring with Harry Wells, who was a colored heavyweight champion. In the ring 22 times, or I would say 22 title fights, really, with Sam Langford. He was in a ring with Fred Fulton and Tommy Gibbons, Bill Brennan, Joe Jeanette, who was another colored heavyweight champion, and had a war in 1909 with Sam McVeigh. Battling Levinsky and Billy Misk. So, Bartley Madden was the goods, but he was not at anywhere near competition for the great Gene Tunney fighting Marine. So Gene Tunney would successfully defend his America's light heavyweight champion on the night of September 25th, 1925. Now the next fight after that was November 13th. The world middleweight champion, Pittsburgh Windmill, Harry Greb, would defeat Tony Morolio. 15 rounds, New York's Yankee Stadium. And he would remain the world middleweight champion. And he would eventually wind up defending his crown against Tiger Flowers. We'll look at that in the next few fights. Now, November 18th, 1925, world heavyweight contender and America's light heavyweight champion, Gene Tunney, who had a record of 74 wins, 1 losses, 4 draws, and 46 knockouts. He was 28 years old when he was defending his crown against the Cleveland Baker boy, who was 22 years old. His name was Johnny Risco. He was also known as the Rubber Man. And the fight took place at the Public Hall in Cleveland. Both hands of Gene Tunney were swollen, and we learned later on that one of his hands, I believe it was his right hand, had broken that fight. Now, who was Cleveland Baker Boy? Let's take a look at the Cleveland Baker Boy. He was born December 18th, 1902 in Austria. That's the home of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Adolf Hitler. He died January 13th, 1953 in Cleveland, Ohio. That's where he got the name the Cleveland Baker Boy. He stood 5'11". He was a heavyweight and had a 74-inch reach. He was in the ring with fighters such as Tommy Loughlin and John Henry Lewis, who he lost to, by the way. Bob Olin, who he defeated. Navy Brown. Now, Navy Brown was an opponent of Joe Louis. Beautiful left hook Joe Louis had thrown. We'll look at that when we go to the Joe Louis era in the 1930s. Now, the Cleveland Baker Boy was also in the ring with Vittorio Campolo, Charlie Ratliff, Paulino Escudon, Big Boy Patterson, Max Baer, Kingfish Novinsky. Now, Joe Louis faced every last one of those opponents except for Big Boy Patterson. Excuse me. So I'm going to show you a few of those opponents that Johnny Risco would be in the ring with. Now, Johnny Risco was in the ring with Tommy Loughlin and called him the Philly Phantom. He was a light heavyweight champion of the world. One of my favorite light heavyweight champions was Tommy Loughlin because of his style. Beautiful fighter he was. As a matter of fact, he was the first fighter along with Jack Sharkey that would start the elimination process when Gene Tunney would retire in 1928 after his fight with Tom Heaney from New Zealand. And Tommy Loughlin gave up his light heavyweight championship belt. And believe it or not, that's how that whole thing got started. And he challenged Jack Sharkey, and that's how the tournament began. So Tommy Loughlin played a big factor in that light heavyweight and heavyweight division. Philly Phantom, Tommy Loughlin. Now, Paulino Escudon, I mentioned him to you before, I should say. Max Melling had observed Paulino Escudon along with Joe Louis. And he noticed a flaw in Joe Louis's arsenal while he was facing Paulino Escudon. Paulino Escudon was from Spain, and he was a big and pretty powerful fighter. But he was, I would say he was a better fighter, obviously, than Primo Carnera for a big man. But he just came around at a time where he didn't have the goods to deal with the Joe Louis and others. But he was a decent fighter, was Paulino Escudon, and he was in a ring with the Cleveland Baker Boy, Johnny Risco. And he was also, like I said, he was a Joe Louis opponent as well. Johnny Risco was in a ring with Vittorio Campolo. And Vittorio Campolo was from Argentina. He was 6 feet, 9 inches. Very tall and a very long reach. And he was in a ring with Primo Carnera and others, Vittorio Campolo. But he was an opponent of Johnny Risco. And I just wanted to show you Vittorio Campolo. Keep in mind, all these are coming out of my scrapbook collections. Another opponent of Johnny Risco was Charlie Ratliff, who was out of Minnesota. He was a heavyweight. Charlie Ratliff was the man that let everybody know that Joe Louis was for real. Hit him with a beautiful short left hook, and he knocked him out clean. But Charlie Ratliff was an opponent for Johnny Risco. And these are all Joe Louis opponents that I'm showing you up until this point, for the exception of Vittorio Campolo. And, of course, Tommy Loughlin. Now, I want to talk about Theodore Tiger Flowers for one moment, because he would eventually face Harry Greb, and he would be the first black middleweight champion of the world. Theodore Tiger Flowers, they called him the Georgia Deacon, was born February 11th, 1893, in Camilla, Georgia. Now, he died November 16th, 1927. He was 34 years of age at the time of his death. He was a southpaw, and he would reside in New York. And he faced the likes of Micky Walker. Now, Micky Walker at that time was 5'7", and he had a 67-inch reach. He was in a ring with Paul Berlenbach and Jack Sharkey, who, by the way, when he fought Jack Sharkey, he went the distance with Jack Sharkey. It was a 15-round draw. And 2 weeks later, Jack Sharkey would become the heavyweight champion of the world. He would also face a fighter by the name of Tommy Loughlin. I showed you Tommy Loughlin. I told you he was the Philly Phantom. And he was an outstanding fighter, was Tommy Loughlin. Mike Mateague and Max Schmeling. He was stopped by Max Smelly. But he was in there with Ted Moore. And many others was Micky Walker. Now, I'm going to get into Micky Walker's career a little deeper when we talk about him and Tiger Flowers. So I want you to know a little bit more about who Micky Walker was and what his relationships were to outside forces. The Tiger Flowers would also be in the ring with Kid Norfolk. His name was William Ward. He stood 5 foot 10 inches and he had a 74-inch reach. Had 144 total bouts with 111 wins. That's remarkable. 26 losses. And Kid Norfolk, he was a colored light heavyweight champion. He would defeat Lee Anderson, who was also a colored light heavyweight champion. Lee Anderson used to break bones. He was a money collector in Harlem, somewhat like Sonny Liston was. And if you owed the mob money and you got a knock on your door at 3 o'clock in the morning, 9 out of 10 chances it would be Lee Anderson. And Tiger Flowers would also be in the ring with Harry Greb. That's what we're going to be talking about in a moment. He was in the ring with many fighters, but Kid Norfolk was in the ring with Harry Greb and Tiger Flowers and battling Siki. Battling Siki was the first colored light heavyweight champion. Actually, I'm sorry. He was the first world heavyweight champion as a black fighter. Alabama Kid. Let me give him his credit. Jamaica Kid and Tuck Jackson. All these fighters Kid Norfolk would be in the ring with. But yeah, battling Siki, he knocked out George Compartier in 1922. That was remarkable. It's on this series as well. And then he turned around a few months later, and he was supposed to be facing Kid Norfolk again, because he did fight Kid Norfolk. He lost to Kid Norfolk. But he was supposed to give him another shot, and he wound up fighting Mike Mateague in Dublin, Ireland on St. Patrick's Day. Mike Mateague was Irish. There was a lot of controversy about that. I showed you that. If that's not on a series, it's in one of my videos. But that was remarkable. So Kid Norfolk was a hell of a fighter. As a matter of fact, one more thing on Kid Norfolk, and we'll get into that when we a little further with Harry Greb. But he fought Harry Greb in 1921. In 1918, Kid Norfolk had challenged, Leo P. Flynn was the manager of Kid Norfolk. And they both challenged Jack Dempsey and Jack Kearns for an opportunity for #1 contention, because they were knocking on the door for a heavyweight title shot with Jess Willard. At that time, they thought it would be Jack Johnson. And, well, at that time, they knew it was Jess Willard, because Jess Willard defeated Jack Johnson in 1915, 26 rounds. So it was the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance. Harlem Renaissance was from 1918 to 1930. And a lot of the musicians and artists were coming around, and they were making Harlem a much better place. It was somewhat like if you went to New Orleans and you went to Mardi Gras. That's kind of sort of like how the Harlem Renaissance was. But you had musicians and others. And it was a good time in Harlem. Well, Jack Dempsey, not only did he refuse, but he didn't even acknowledge these two men. And so Leo P. Flynn had wrote out a contract, and he wanted to make sure that Jack Dempsey would sign that contract. So when Harry Wills fought, had an opportunity to face Jack Dempsey, they both signed a contract, Jack Dempsey and Harry Wills. And Jack Dempsey never acknowledged the contract that he signed, and he was kicked out of New York. New York State Athletic Commission kicked him out, said you would never fight in New York again. I'm getting a little ahead of this conversation, but I just want to let you know about Kid Norfolk, how he tried an opportunity to face Jack Dempsey in 1918, and he was ignored. And one of the problems was that Kid Norfolk was sparring with Bill Brennan. Bill Brennan was to face Jack Dempsey in 1920 for the World Heavyweight Championship bout. Now, Jack Dempsey had faced Bill Brennan a total of 3 times. And Bill Brennan would be Billy Mitch's last fight before he would die of Bright disease. But Kid Norfolk was too good for his own good. And he beat the brakes off of Bill Brennan in sparring, and the word got back to Jack Dempsey, and that was the end of it for Kid Norfolk. So he would fight Harry Greb in 1921. And before he fought Harry Greb, he fought Lee Anderson, and he wound up getting a thumbing in the eye, so he lost vision in his left eye, did Kid Norfolk. And ironically, the same exact thing happened to Harry Greb. an accidentally thumbing or an elbow went into the eye of Harry Greb. So he fought 47 more times before his career was over. They were all title fights. So amazing. So that's the deal on Kid Norfolk. He had a lot of battle royale fights. He was an outstanding fighter, he was. And the other fighter that Tiger Flowers would be in the ring with was the Joplin Ghost, Jeff Clark. He was 5'11", he had a 79-inch reach, and he was born in Morrisville, New Jersey. Now, he would die in Joplin, Missouri, and that's how he got the name of Joplin Ghost. But Jeff Clark was in the ring with Harry Wills, several times. Joe Jeanette several times. Sam McVeigh, Sam Langford, Willie Meade, who was in the ring with Jack Dempsey. Kid Norfolk, and battling Jim Johnson, just to name a few. So the Joplin Ghost, Jeff Clark, was a hell of a fighter. Like I said, he was in the ring with Joe Jeanette several times. Tiger Flowers was also in the ring with Sam Langford. He was 5'7". He had a 74-inch reach. He was in the ring with Harry Wills 22 times. Now, he defeated Harry Wills twice, and he lost to him 6 times and had 15 draws. Or no decision matches. And Sam Langford, like I said, he fought Tiger Flowers. He was in the ring with young Peter Jackson and Bill Tate and Lee Anderson and Stanley Ketchel. And Sam McVeigh and Joe Jeanette and Joe Walcott. Dave Holly and Joe Gans and Fireman Jim Flynn and Dixie Kid. You name them, Sam Langford was in the ring with him. And unfortunately for Tiger Flowers, he would die November 27th in the hospital for a removal of scar tissue in his eye. So I just wanted to give somewhat of a background on Tiger Flowers. February 26, 1926, Georgia Deacon would be in the ring in New York's Madison Square Garden with Harry Greb. And he would become the first black middleweight champion in boxing history. And another thing about Sam Langford, he was the only fighter, black or white, to face the first black lightweight champion. And he went the distance and defeated Joe Gans. He was the first fighter, black or white, to defeat, fight the first black welterweight champion. And that was the Barbados Demon, Joe Walcott. Went 15 rounds and it was a draw. And I say defeat because Sam Langford really won that fight. And they gave courtesy and credit to the Barbados Demon, Joe Walcott. And they made it a draw. He would be the first fighter, black or white, to fight the first black middleweight champion. And that was Tiger Flowers. And would dust them off in 2 rounds. There was absolutely no contest between those two men. And we're looking at 1922. We're looking at some good fighters during that year. But he would also be the first fighter, black or white, to fight the first black heavyweight champion in Jack Johnson. And that fight took place in 1906. And it was 15 rounds and went the distance. But he stayed in there with Jack Johnson. Now, you're looking at a 20-year-old man. Kid, really. And he started when he was turning 18. He was 17 at the time in 1902 when he turned professional. But he would win the Boston Amateur Featherweight title with only 3 fights under his belt. So he won a featherweight title all the way up to the heavyweight title in the color division, Australian division, when he defeated Sam McVeigh. He would win the Australian heavyweight championship belt. So Sam Langford was the real deal. Now, August 19th, 1926, world middleweight champion, Georgia Deacon, Tiger Flowers, who was 33 years old. He was a southpaw. He would defeat 32-year-old two-division champion, America's light heavyweight champion, and the world middleweight champion, Harry Greb. 15 rounds in New York's Madison Square Garden. There was 15,000 spectators in the audience. And Greb received $250,000. He didn't receive money. He received the summons prior to entering into the ring by Sally Bronis. There was 4 allegations of infectious. And would also, to add insult to injury, they would slap on another $100,000 for breach of promise. Now, he stepped out on someone he made a promise to. And that didn't work out for Harry Greb, because not only did he get hit with a fine like that, but he would lose the fight. And he would earn money, but he wouldn't be able to pay them off. And unfortunately, that same year, he passed away anyway. But Harry Greb was known as the Pittsburgh Windmill. Stood 5 foot 8 inches, and he had a 71-inch reach. He had 261 total bouts, or wins actually, 17 losses and 18 draws, with 48 knockouts. So he had 261 wins, 17 losses, 18 draws with 48 knockouts. He weighed 159 pounds. Tiger Flowers, known as the Georgia Deacon. He had a 76-inch reach. He had 117 wins, 17 losses, 5 draws with 61 by the knockout route. He weighed 159 pounds, and both men had faced Allentown Joe Gans, and they would both win by unanimous decision. And Tiger Flowers is very underrated, and it's a shame because he was just a man who was thrown in there with everybody, heavyweights and light heavyweights. So you didn't get an opportunity to see the true potential of Tiger Flowers. Now, Tiger Flowers was a deacon, and he walked around with a Bible in one hand and a gym bag in another hand. He would be preaching the word of the gospel. He was what they call a gentleman, and I knew a man who knew him personally. His name was Paul Cavalier. You hear me mention his name quite a bit. And Paul Cavalier watched him spar on the heavy bag, and Jack Dempsey just took over the bag. And at that time, he just walked away because there was nothing you could do during those days. And it's just unfortunate that he didn't really come around at the right time because he was a spectacular fighter. He was a southpaw, very tall, very rangy. And he got cheated out of his middleweight championship belt with Micky Walker. And we'll go through that in 1926, towards the end of the year. But I just wanted to elaborate on that fight. So let's take a look at that fight in a Tiger Flowers scrapbook. Tiger Flowers has his own scrapbook, as Harry Greb has his own scrapbook. So let's take a look at that fight in Tiger Flowers' scrapbook. All right, so we're now looking at the Tiger Flowers scrapbook. Here we have Praying Deacon, Tiger Flowers, wins middleweight title from Harry Greb. Now, that was when he fought Harry Greb and defeated him. They fought each other a total of 3 times. The first Negro ever to head division's, quote, Bible as he battles jaded Pittsburgher, taking 15-round contests on points. As you can see here, this is the gospel. Blessed be the Lord, my strength. I'm trying to focus this here. I'm sorry about this. It was in Palms 144th. And he used to pray before every fight, as Edwin Ochoa Rosario used to do. And he was just a remarkable fighter. And I'm just scanning here. I want you guys to read this for yourself, but I want you to think about this for one moment. Here's a black fighter who finally had an opportunity for a middleweight championship, and Harry Greb gave it to him. And what was ironic, in 1924, when Harry Greb beat him the first time, a lot of people felt as though Tiger Flowers won that fight. And Harry Greb said the only thing that Tiger Flowers needed to do was straighten his punches out, because he was punching wide. And he said if he does that, he would beat any fighter he ever fights. And he said, I'm going to draw the color line. I'm never going to fight this man again. And he wound up fighting him 2 more times. But Tiger Flowers was something else, man. He's very underrated. Excuse me. He's very underrated, and he should be commended for the work that he has done. Now, this is the lineal line. I can't hardly see this too well, but I'm going to just tell you because I know the lineal line. Tom Challenger and George Rookie and Mike Donovan, George LeBlancy, Bob Fitzsimmons, Tommy Ryan, who is it? Kid McCoy, I think it was, Joe Thomas, Stanley Ketchel, Billy Papke, Frank Klaus and George Chipp, Al McCoy, Michael Dowd and Johnny Wilson and Harry Greb. I hope I'm right. And Tiger Flowers took the title away from Harry Greb, and then Micky Walker took it from him, and on and on and on. But as it says here, paid admissions to the title bout was 16,337. Amazing. That's spectators. And you also have a total of 104,569. Wow, that was a lot for that time. So I'm just trying to clear this for you. I don't know why this is acting up, but just wanted to show you one page of this particular fight. This fight is 20 pages in Tiger Flowers' scrapbook, but I'm just showing you the one page. And I just wanted you to see that Tiger Flowers, the first black middleweight champion of the world, would take the title away from Harry Greb. Phenomenal. That was history. So salute to Tiger Flowers. A remarkable fighter Tiger Flowers was. I mean, he was just incredible. And I just wanted to touch on him for a moment. And my brother Curtis Anderson and I were talking, in fact, this morning about Tiger Flowers and how underrated he actually was. He was a magnificent fighter, beautiful fighter was Tiger Flowers. Like I said, I heard a lot of stories from Paul Cavalier, my friend Teddy, a lot of guys who actually saw him hit the bag and spar and saw him fight, told me personal stories about Tiger Flowers. And I got to tell you, brilliant southpaw. Brilliant southpaw. All right, let's go on to the next fight. Now, I told you I'll be showing you pictures of fighters sporadically. This is Joe Burrell out of Philadelphia. He was a very, very good fighter. He was a middleweight. He used to spar a lot with Jeff Smith, And Jeff Smith was from originally Brooklyn, New York. He would reside in Harlem, New York, where he would train with Johnny Wilson. And he would eventually move to Bayonne. They called him the Bayonne Globetrotter, Jeff Smith. And he would train a lot with Joe Burrell. But June 3rd, 1926, Todd Morgan knocks out Steve Kid Sullivan, 6 rounds, Brooklyn, New York. And he remains the junior lightweight champion. Now, Todd Morgan, his name was Albert Morgan Pinckney. He was born December 25th, 1902 in Washington. He died August 3rd, 1953 in Seattle, Washington. He stood 5'7.5", fought from 1920 to 1942, and had 210 bouts. 133 wins, 42 losses, and 29 by the knockout route. He had a 71-inch reach, and he was a lightweight. June 10th, 1926. Light heavyweight, Paul Berlenbach. He's a world champion. He defeats Young Stribling, 15 rounds in New York's Yankee Stadium. Friday, June 25th, 1926. Nebraskan Wildcat. Ace Hutkins, who was 20 years old, gets off the floor to KO undefeated Ruby Goldstein, who was 18 at that time. He was a little green coming in. And he was unbeaten in 15 rounds performance along with the Nebraskan Wildcat, who, by the way, was a very good fighter. And the fight, was in New York's Coney Island in Brooklyn. The referee was Patsy Haney. And he counted out Goldstein in 4 rounds. It was scheduled for a total of 6 rounds. And the Jewish community just melted. Now, he fought Sid Terrace at the Polo Grounds. And you think they melted then. But they had a hard time swallowing this one because Ruby Goldstein was 18 years old and he was undefeated. And he looked like the goods because they were looking for the next Benny Leonard in that Jewish community. And I met Ruby Goldstein. He lived on Cherry Street in Manhattan. Now, I had a friend, Teddy, who also lived on Cherry Street. And he was a very good friend of mine. I used to go to his house all the time, and all we did was talk boxing. He had the memorabilia that you won't believe. And he saw Tiger Flowers. He saw them all train and spar, and he used to live in Stillman's gym. Well, he took me across the street and introduced me to Ruby Goldstein. Now, I was talking to Ruby Goldstein for many hours upon hours, and he told me hundreds of stories about all his referee days. And he refereed fights like Dick Tiger, Gene Armstrong, Muhammad Ali when he fought Sonny Banks, Told me about Ray Robinson and Joey Maxim in 1952, and Emil Griffith, and Benny Kid Perrette in 1962. That famous, horrible fight that happened between Benny Kid Perrette and Emil Griffith. He was the referee for that fight. And he judged a lot of fights. He judged fights and refereed as well. Ezzard Charles and Rocky Marciano. Joe Louis and Rocky Marciano. Carlos Ortiz and Paulino Rossi. Chuck Burns and Jack McVeigh and Dave Shade. He was a referee for these fights and judges for these fights. So he told me a lot of stories about boxing history. And I most appreciate that about him. So who is Ruby Goldstein? They called him the June of the Ghetto. Was born October 7th, 1907 in the Lower East Side. That's the Cherry Street. He died April 23rd, 1984. He was 76 years of age at the time of his death, and he would reside in Lower Manhattan. Stood 5'4.5". He fought from 1924 to 1937. He has 61 total bouts, 55 wins, 6 losses, and 39 by the knockout route. I had mentioned to you that he was knocked out in the first round by Sid Terrace. And both of these men were from the Jewish community, and they closed up shop. Kids didn't go to school. They didn't eat for a week. It was their idol. See, boxing at that time was totally different than it is now. It was everything to you. And you had neighborhood rivalries where world championship fights were in your own community. Didn't have to go to Madison Square Garden. You could have went to Broadway Arena. You could have went to St. Nicholas Arena and saw these two fighters. And that was a world championship fight for you. It meant everything to you. You idolized these guys at that time.